I'm delighted to welcome our first guest today for a discussion about the role of government in the transition to a cleaner, safer, and smarter transportation future. Many of us have had the privilege of working with Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm in one of her previous positions. As a two-term governor of Michigan, the first woman to hold that position, she certainly understands our industry's importance to her state. She also understands its importance to our country, to our economy, to our position in the global community, to our hopes for continued prosperity and environmental and social progress. As Secretary of Energy, she is helping lead the Biden administration's goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. That's a goal we support, and it's an area in which she has deep knowledge and experience. She was instrumental in helping to navigate the energy crunch earlier this century, and she was an effective advocate and contributor in addressing the 2008 recession. She has always been a strong proponent of electric vehicles, and thanks to her leadership, 1/3 of all North American electric vehicle battery production now takes place in Michigan. While our industry continues to make great strides on innovative technologies, we still face challenges, including the ongoing effects of COVID-19 on supply chains and the return to work, in addition to the broad transformations that are underway. There is no better person to discuss what policymakers and industry leaders need to do together. With that, it is my pleasure to welcome United States Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. Secretary Granholm, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
It's good to see you. I wanted to start with the Biden administration's goals on climate. As we speak, the Global Climate Conference, COP26, is taking place. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk through the broad goals, climate goals of the Biden administration, and what you hope to accomplish at COP26.
Right. Well, clearly the biggest goals are net zero, of course, by 2050 and 100% clean electricity by 2035, and then cutting our CO2 emissions in half, 52 to 54% by 2030. So those are really big goals. And of course, our department has a big role in helping to achieve those goals. So, and I just want to say, I really appreciate the auto innovators and the leadership for, forging the role of transportation in those goals with us.
Yeah, I want to come to transportation in a second. Obviously, that's of interest to all of us, and I do think we have shared goals in this space. But let's talk a little bit. The Department of Energy is so significant and big and broad in its mission. Maybe talk a little bit, before we get into auto specifically, about some of the initiatives at the department that are focused on reducing energy consumption and emissions.
Yeah, first of all, we have been really focused on deployment. Now, this is a muscle that the Department of Energy hadn't exercised as much as we are right now. So, if we're going to get to this big goal of 100% clean electricity by 2035, we've got a few years to get there, right? But really, 100% is so big that we have got to accelerate deployment of technology that is off the shelf, right? That we know is already ready to go. So wind and solar, honestly, technologies that we don't use as much, but that are also ready, that we have that we don't need technological advances for, like geothermal or hydrogen. Hydropower. Hydrogen is the future. And so we've got to deploy what we have right now, but also focus on the future. And the future would include things like hydrogen, and that means vehicles, but it also means hydrogen for energy storage and delivery. So blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, all of the different types of hydrogen that are zero carbon emissions, as well as reducing the cost of battery storage. That's we've launched several what are known as earth shots, and those are big goals to reduce costs. So for example, in battery storage, we want to reduce the costs for utility scale storage, that's 10 hours plus, by 90% within the decade. Similarly, with hydrogen, we want to reduce the cost of clean hydrogen by 80% within the decade. So we are always looking to the future, but we are really trying to deploy for the present.
Yeah, so I love this idea of deployment and investments in the future at the same time, and that's exactly how we think about it in the auto industry. And by the way, energy storage, obviously we depend on a clean, resilient electricity grid, so more storage, the ability to harness renewables is of course important. That cleans the EV fleet. So let's talk a little bit about EVs. The Biden administration announced in August of this year a goal to get to 50% of new vehicle sales in the United States as electric vehicles by the end of the decade, by 2030. And we're talking about battery electric vehicles, we're talking about plug-in hybrid vehicles, we're talking about, as you noted, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. This is a goal that the auto industry embraces. Talk a little bit about what the department's role is in getting us to that ambitious goal of 50% zero-emission vehicles by 2030.
Yeah, well, obviously the president's goal is about making it possible for every American to afford an EV and to get wherever they want to go in that EV. And so our success clearly depends on batteries. And at DOE, we are continually working to help make them cheaper and more efficient and less wasteful to help, and to help scale up their production. So over the past decade, if I can brag about DOE, and I brag about them because I'm new here, so I can brag about my colleagues and the work that they've done, but they've helped to reduce the cost of lithium EV packs by 85%, to obviously in partnership with the private sector, but funding the advances in battery technology. I think it's at $133 per kilowatt hour, but our goal is to lower that cost further to $60 per kilowatt hour or less. So we really are cost competitive with internal combustion engine vehicles. And, then it's not just plummeting battery costs that will help to save EV owners money. We all know they save about $600 a year for not buying gasoline. EVs have, on average, we know, $6,000 lower maintenance and repair costs over their lifetime than gas-powered cars. And then, of course, so that's the cost. And then the EV charging, we want to make faster and easier. Our goal is to decrease recharge time to less than 15 minutes for a 300-mile range. And of course, the president's goal in the bipartisan infrastructure deal is to get 250,000 charging stations additionally across the country, especially in places where where there isn't a big concentration of them, where the private sector has not gotten involved as much. So maybe rural areas, poorer areas, certainly along freeways, et cetera. So those are the goals of the administration, in addition to trying to make it cheaper to purchase upfront an electric vehicle through incentives. So all of that is happening.
Yeah, and that's so much there. And by the way, I should add to the list of benefits of EV ownership is that they're fun to drive. I know you know this as a driver of an EV. From a customer's perspective, they're great. They're fun to drive.
There's one other thing. Before we jump off of batteries, for 1 second, there's one other thing that DOE is working on, which is new battery chemistries that don't rely on as many rare critical minerals like cobalt, and making the batteries then easier to recycle at the end of life. So that is another extreme, if you will.
I want to come back to that because I think that's so important, and the work you're doing there is really significant. So back to the idea of complementary public policies. So we've got a goal. Industry is investing. When I look at the numbers, $330 billion in industry investment by mid-decade in electrification, 130 unique zero-emission vehicle models on the roads by mid-decade. So investments being made, progress being made. But you mentioned a couple of complementary policies, I would call them, complementary to building markets. One you mentioned is consumer incentives. Secondly, you mentioned infrastructure. So I want to dig into those a little bit more. How important is it to build awareness and access and affordability for consumers at a point at which we're at maybe 3 to 4% of the market. Is that an important tool in the toolbox from your perspective?
Oh, clearly, and you obviously the auto industry is doing their share of that as well. But sort of, you know, it'll be interesting to see what the impact of higher gasoline prices has on moving people in this direction as well. Obviously, we want it to be affordable for people to drive a car, no matter what kind of car they have. But obviously, the increase in gas prices might cause some to take a look. I think the penetration, the combination, the unusual combinations that we're seeing of technologies like the solar and vehicle battery combination is a really interesting way to penetrate a market that might not be automatic for electric vehicles. I really think that this notion of providing upfront incentives at the point of purchase is important. I would love to see further work on sort of trade-ins, cash for clunkers, if you will, that would allow for trade-in to EVs. We've got a little more policy work that we've got to do on that, but any kind of incentive that moves people there. And obviously the incentives from the auto industry themselves in designing and putting forth vehicles that are surprising vehicles. I think of like the F-150 or the from Ford or GM, the Hummer, which is sold out. The all-electric Hummer sold out for a couple of years, I think. So I think that the combination of both policy, some sizzle from the auto industry itself, and making sure that we demystify a bit the electric vehicle by both, just bully pulpit stuff, but the private sector doing what they can on the advertising side to make sure that people are comfortable.
Yeah, and if you watch any television, you see a lot of ads for these vehicles. I really appreciate your point about incentives being available at the point of sale. I've had this conversation with several auto dealers who say that that's critical. The idea that the incentive could be available to reduce the amount of the vehicle that's financed and really reduce a customer's monthly payment. That really drives affordability and access. So, very much appreciate that point. Let's turn back to infrastructure. You mentioned the role of government in infrastructure. Why can't the private sector do infrastructure development by itself? What is the role of government in the development of infrastructure?
Really, these are things we all, when we say infrastructure, obviously we often talk about roads and bridges and, the electricity grid, which is obviously a point of infrastructure as well, broadband. These are things as a nation we've decided we are all going to pool our resources to make available so that we are a connected nation, so that people can move from one place to another and products can move from one place to another. So that, there has been clearly private sector investments in infrastructure where people may, decide that they are going to finance a road, for example, and an investment firm has taken the profits off of that, et cetera. And that's one way. That's a way. But and we appreciate public-private partnerships in all things, right? But what we really want to do is to make sure that investment in infrastructure is accessible to everybody. And the way it's accessible to everybody is making sure that our collective tax dollars go to making it open and accessible. So to me, people forget about the importance of what we've decided to do collectively as a society. And infrastructure is probably at the top of the list of things that we decide together we are going to pool our resources to fund, and that's for a reason, to make it accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I think that point applies so well to EV charging infrastructure and hydrogen fueling infrastructure. We want all communities to benefit, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly right.
That makes sense. I want to work further up the supply chain a little bit. Another opportunity for complementary policy support could be in helping the retooling and the reimagining of the industrial base. This is a massive undertaking to really think about an industrial base devoted to internal combustion engines becoming now an industrial base devoted to EVs. Is there a role for government in that transformation and in that sort of retooling exercise?
You're preaching so much to what has seared my soul as the former governor of Michigan, and this notion that in order to be a strong nation, you have to be able to make things. And the backbone of our manufacturing sector is the automobile. And that means the backbone of vehicle 2.0, which is the electric vehicle, must be part of that industrial strategy. And really, our national security depends on us being able to manufacture the means, not just for our transportation, but for our own defense. And the overlapping nature of supply chains with the defense industry is really critical. So we absolutely need to develop the supply chain strategy. And I just want to, when I was governor, when the auto industry was on the brink of collapse, jobs were shipped overseas as supply chains were shipped overseas to take advantage of low wages abroad. In addition to the fact that we were in a recession and the auto industry went bankrupt, many in the auto industry went bankrupt. I feel like as governor, I looked into the eyes of too many people, workers who lost their jobs through no fault of their own. And I'm never going to forget that. And I don't think that any governor, anybody who is a mayor of a town where a factory has left and remains vacant, that is a scar on the soul of that community. So, I was so thrilled when the administration made it a top priority to bolster the domestic supply chains and really create millions of jobs in EV manufacturing and other clean energy technologies as well. DOE is right at the center of that. The microchip shortage is an example. It shows why we can't be reliant on international supply chains for technologies that are so vital to tackling climate change and to growing the economy. It's why the president has signed an executive order in February that directed federal agencies, including DOE, to identify the vulnerabilities in supply chains and to figure out steps to really bolster domestically those supply chains on critical technologies, including high capacity batteries and critical minerals and pharmaceuticals, semiconductors. So that effort led to a national blueprint, which was released in June, for securing our lithium battery supply chain by 2030. And so we worked with the Commerce Department, the State Department, Defense, other agencies to set goals on every step of the supply chain, from critical minerals to processing, to manufacturing, to recycling. These are steps that are going to be critical for scaling up battery and EV production here at home and for putting Americans to work building the cars of the future. So supply chains are critical.
Yeah, I think that is really important. And so let's talk a little bit more about that. You talked about the manufacturing of batteries and battery components, and you also talked about securing the appropriate raw materials. I mean, again, you know something about this not only as Secretary of Energy, but also in your former position as Governor of Michigan. For example, the importance of mining and siting mining. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what are the challenges and opportunities for securing raw minerals here in the United States at home so that we can have some domestic control over the key components of our EV future?
Yeah, this is really important. Mining has a lot of opposition to it among the environmental community because some companies have not done so sustainably, right? But here's the kicker, is that in America, we have got the means to sustainably extract critical minerals, and we've got abundant critical minerals beneath us. And to do so in a way that's in partnership with the communities that surround a potential mine. And so there are best practices for responsible mining. And if we do this right, then our critical minerals can be used by us, but also will be at the top of the list for export because other countries are looking to obtain responsibly mined minerals as well. So if we're going to all rely on the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has abuses in child labor practices for mining for cobalt, well, shame on us. Why aren't we finding the way to be able to do this responsibly? So, I'm very bullish on us being able to demonstrate how it can be done. I mean, DOE is already investing in R&D for domestic extraction of critical minerals from the Appalachians to the Rockies and beyond. We are supporting 13 projects in fossil fuel communities across the country to help boost mineral production and to create skills-matched jobs for fossil energy workers, and of course to spur local economic growth. It's part of the administration's commitment to making sure that every community can contribute to and benefit from this clean energy transition. So to extract and refine these materials, and we don't have processing in this country. It would be crazy to responsibly extract these minerals and then have to send them to China for processing. We should be responsibly refining, responsibly doing each step in the supply chain, which we can. So, we've learned how to do this while remediating lands and waters by extracting minerals from coal ash and refuse, acid mine drainage, geothermal brines. We are investing in those technologies right now. We just need to take them to scale so we can clean up the environment and we can fuel our clean energy economy at the same time. And plus, if we make technologies like batteries more recyclable, we're going to be helping that export, but also helping us here at home. So it's a whole of government approach that we're taking, John, to get this done. We are working with several federal agencies, including the Department of Interior and Defense and Commerce, as we strategize around really taking to scale these technologies in a responsible way.
Really appreciate hearing that, because I do think we need to be thinking about the value chain and the supply chain broadly. As we finish up, I hear you talking not only about climate, but about jobs, and not only about jobs, but our economic security. So how important is the work you're doing, not only to reducing emissions and to achieving our climate goals, but to our national competitiveness?
Oh, there is no doubt. There is no doubt. I mean, we could sit by, as we have in the past. Well, first of all, let's just be clear. There is a $23 trillion global market for the technologies that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, that includes vehicles and batteries, but it includes the full suite. $23 trillion global market by 2030. Okay, that's a huge opportunity for us to exercise our own competitiveness, right? We could sit by and allow our economic competitors to take advantage of that, or we could say, we are getting in the game. We're gonna invent these products here. We are gonna manufacture them here. We're gonna stamp them made in America. We're gonna deploy them here, and we're gonna be able to export them as well. And because we've done it in a way that reduces CO2 emissions, they're gonna be in demand across the planet. So the full spectrum of competitiveness. And I would say the research and development component of that is really important too. And the president has really wanted to invest in our national labs. The Department of Energy has 17 national labs that are working on these next generation solutions. So the earth shots that I described at the beginning of our conversation, the hydrogen earth shot, the earth shot related to making sure we reduce CO2 emissions. We've announced some other ideas, including a carbon removal earth shot so that we can remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So we are looking at all these advanced technologies, which, by the way, other countries, my counterparts in other countries, the energy ministers of other nations, are all looking to as well. If we can crack the code on green hydrogen, on reducing the cost of electrolyzers, for example, if we can crack the code on really bringing down the cost of batteries, these are competitive advantages for the United States and will only increase our global competitiveness and, of course, bring jobs to the U.S.
Well, Secretary Granholm, it's been a pleasure being with you today. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much, John. Great to see you.
And you as well.